What if you knew exactly how you were going to die? Not because a doctor told you, not because you were already sick, but because somehow you just knew. Throughout history, people have made strange comments about their own deaths. Some predicted the age they would die. Others described the exact way it would happen, and a few seemed to know the exact day their lives would end. Most of the time, we would dismiss statements like these as jokes, coincidences, or maybe just dark thoughts that happen to come true. But the stories you're about to hear are different, because some of these predictions were made years before the deaths actually happened. And when you look at what these people said and what eventually happened to them, the similarities are difficult to ignore. So tonight, we're looking at people who may have predicted their own deaths. And as we go deeper, ask yourself one question. Were these simply coincidences? Or can some people somehow sense when their time is running out? Welcome to Open at Midnight, and whatever you do, don't make any predictions about your own future tonight. Story 1. The Mathematician Who Calculated His Own Death. Our first story begins with a man who spent his entire life studying numbers. His name was Abraham de Moivre. Born in France in 1667, de Moivre became a respected mathematician known for his work involving probability. In other words, he spent his life calculating the likelihood of things happening. But according to one famous story, near the end of his life, he attempted to calculate something much darker, the exact date of his own death. As de Moivre grew older, he reportedly noticed something strange about his sleeping habits. Every night, he was sleeping approximately 15 minutes longer than the night before. Most people probably wouldn't think much of this, but de Moivre was a mathematician, so he began tracking the pattern. 15 extra minutes, then another 15, then another. And eventually, he reportedly made a disturbing calculation. If his sleeping time continued increasing at the same rate, there would eventually come a day when he would sleep for a full 24 hours. And according to the legend, de Moivre decided that would be the day he died. He calculated the date, November 27th, 1754, and then November 27th arrived. Abraham de Moivre died that day. He was 87 years old. Now, there is something important you should know about this story. Historians have questioned whether de Moivre truly made the prediction before his death, because contemporary documentation of it is limited. So it may be a genuine prediction, or it may be a legend that grew after he died. But either way, the story has survived for centuries. A mathematician who spent his life calculating probability may have made his final calculation about himself. And according to the story, he got the answer exactly right. But the next man didn't calculate his death. He connected it to something moving through space. Story 2. Mark Twain and Halley's Comet. In 1835, something spectacular appeared in the sky. Halley's Comet. The famous comet passes near Earth roughly once every 75 to 76 years. And just 2 weeks after its closest approach to the sun that year, a child was born. His name was Samuel Clemens. The world would later know him as Mark Twain. Twain became one of the most famous writers in American history, but as he grew older, he became strangely fascinated by the connection between his life and the comet that had appeared around the time he was born. By 1909, Mark Twain was an old man, and Halley's Comet was returning. That was when Twain made an eerie prediction. He said that he had arrived with Halley's Comet and expected to leave with it. He even said it would be the greatest disappointment of his life if he didn't. Think about that. The comet had not returned yet. But Twain seemed convinced that when it did, his life would end. In April of 1910, Halley's Comet reached its closest point to the sun, and 1 day later, Mark Twain died. The man who said he came in with the comet left with it too. Now, was Twain actually predicting his death? He was elderly, his health was declining, and maybe he simply understood that his life was nearing its end. But still, out of every day, he could have died. It happened almost perfectly alongside the return of the object he had connected to his birth, 74 years apart. One human lifetime, one complete journey of a comet, and one prediction that came true almost exactly as he described it. But our next story may be even stranger, because this man didn't just predict how he would die. He reportedly predicted the exact age. Story 3. Pistol Pete. Maravich. Pete Maravich was one of the most extraordinary basketball players of his generation. Fans knew him as Pistol Pete. He was famous for his incredible ball handling, creative passes, and a style of play that seemed years ahead of its time. But in 1974, when Maravich was only 26 years old, he reportedly made a strange comment during an interview. He said he didn't want to play 10 years in professional basketball, and then die of a heart attack at 40. At the time, it probably sounded like nothing more than an exaggerated comment. A young athlete talking about life after basketball. There was no reason to believe those words would become important. Years passed, and Maravich eventually retired from professional basketball. Then, on January 5th, 1988, he joined a casual pickup basketball game in California. According to accounts of that day, Maravich had been playing normally. Then suddenly, he collapsed. Pete Maravich was rushed for help, but he could not be saved. The cause was related to his heart, and his age, 40, the same age he had mentioned years earlier. An autopsy later revealed something shocking. Maravich had been born with a rare congenital heart abnormality, and somehow he had become one of the greatest basketball players alive, without knowing how unusual his heart actually was. So how did a 26-year-old man mention dying from a heart problem at exactly 40, and then suffer a fatal cardiac event at that exact age? Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe the quote has gained extra significance because of what happened later. But once you know the ending, the words are impossible to hear the same way. And this is where things become even more unsettling. Because sometimes, the prediction isn't spoken decades before. Sometimes it comes much closer to the end. Coincidence or premonition? So what is actually happening in stories like these? There are several possibilities. The first is simple coincidence. Human beings make thousands of predictions throughout their lives. We say things like, "This is going to kill me. I'm not going to live past 50. I have a bad feeling about this." Most of those statements mean nothing. But eventually, one of them may accidentally match reality, and when it does, we remember it. There is also something called hindsight bias. Once we know how a story ends, earlier details suddenly seem more important. A casual joke becomes a warning. A dream becomes a vision. A strange feeling becomes a premonition. The ending changes the way we remember the beginning. But there is another possibility. Maybe the body sometimes recognizes danger before the conscious mind does. A person may feel subtle physical changes, a heart beating differently, a sense of exhaustion, a feeling that something inside them is wrong. They may not understand it logically, but the brain is still receiving information. And that feeling may emerge as anxiety, a dream, or the overwhelming sense that something bad is coming. But then there are predictions like Mark Twain's. A man connects his life to a comet. The comet returns, and he dies one day after its closest passage to the sun. Or Pete Maravich. A young athlete mentions a heart attack at 40. Years later, he dies from a heart-related event at 40. Those are the stories that make coincidence feel almost too easy. Maybe none of us truly know when we're going to die. Maybe these people didn't either. Maybe they simply made comments that became terrifying, only after fate gave those words new meaning. But what if there is something else happening? What if sometimes, for reasons we don't understand, people can feel the end approaching, not see it clearly, not know every detail, but sense it, a feeling, a dream, a strange thought that refuses to leave, a sentence spoken years too early that only makes sense when it's too late. And maybe the creepiest part of all is that you never know which random thing you say today. Someone might remember after you're gone. So what do you think? Did any of these people truly predict their own deaths? Or are we just very good at finding patterns after tragedy happens? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you know another case I should investigate, leave it below, because some stories don't end when the person dies. Sometimes, that's when the mystery begins. Subscribe to Open at Midnight for more dark history, unexplained mysteries, disturbing true stories, and the strange things that keep us awake long after midnight. Until next time, keep the lights low and stay curious, because after midnight, some stories are just beginning.